Previously on DevOps Explained. But that was terribly wrong. It cannot be further away from that. Writing code is design. So that was the situation at the end of the 20th century. Around year 1999, what's or not, right? Everybody worked, most of us actually, not everybody worked in a waterfall fashion. Most of us suffered, except maybe managers, but they suffered as well. And something had to change, and something did change. It changed in a drastic way, in a way that changed our industry completely. It was unexpected by many, planned by some, and the end result happened on a mountain. In 2001, 17 clever people, I will put the names somewhere on the screen. Anyway, 17 clever people met in a ski resort, and after days of drinking and skiing and having fun, because hey, you don't choose a ski resort for no particular reason, they came up with something that we know today as Agile Manifesto. Agile was born, and it changed how we develop software. We are yet to discuss whether it changed how we deliver software, but it definitely changed, for some, how we develop it. And the manifesto says, and I will read this, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And then it says, and this part is critical, that is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Most of the things that we valued before Agile were the things on the right side, or not necessarily valued, but were forced or had higher priority, were things on the right side. And now we're switching to those statements on the left. The problem is, however, that even today, 20 years later, most companies are still not applying Agile principles. They're saying that they are, but they are not. They are waterfall in disguise, or scrumfall, or whatever we call it, right? Agile became popular, and then companies jumped into, hey, we are going to do this new thing because I'm a manager, I make decisions, and I want to make a decision to do this thing called Agile, but I'm not willing to change anything for real, so we are going to fake it. That's not necessarily the words anybody used, but that's the outcome of Agile in many organizations today. But I'm going to ignore all that, and let's assume that everybody is Agile for real. Still, Agile had a couple of problems, actually one major problem, and the problem is in a single word. Let me read the statement one more time. Working software over comprehensive documentation. And the correct statement should be delivered software over comprehensive documentation. Because here's what happens. We had 10 or 15 or 20 years of Agile party, and really how long it lasted depends on when somebody jumped on the train. And rarely anybody invited sysadmins and operators to the party. Right? They were still locked in some basement doing the stuff that they were doing before Agile was born, while testers, developers, and managers rallied around Agile, and they started having the teams that were practicing Scrum or what's not. And that was cool because that allowed us to streamline, to be much more efficient within the first half of the life cycle of our applications. We ignored, or many of us ignored completely, what is happening on the right side. What happens after we write code and test and maybe build binaries? Who deploys it to production? Who monitors our applications? And so on and so forth. And the answer is somebody else. So we were willing to create seemingly self-sufficient teams that can do everything related with the life cycle of application, but completely forgetting that life cycle is not only writing code and running tests and building something, that application also needs to run somewhere, that it needs to be monitored, and that we need to react to changes happening in production, not only to changes happening to requirements or the needs of our applications. So operators, sysadmins, and all the people on the right side of the whole equation were not invited to those teams, were not invited to the party, at least not in most organizations. And something had to change because application is useless. It is pointless to have something that is not running in production, or actually that's a wrong statement. It's not that it's not running in production, but it is pointless to streamline only half of our production pipeline, of the life cycle of our application. We had to include those people to the party. We had to include them into the teams, or at least provide sufficient knowledge to the agile teams so that they can not only write code and do whatever they were doing, but also deploy to production, react to changes to production, and what's not. All the things that are happening on the right side of the life cycle of an application. So we had a problem, and that problem is that people on the right side of life cycle of application were not invited to the party. We did not include operators and sysadmins and what's not, all the people on the right into those teams. We did not create self-sufficient teams, but only teams that are half-sufficient. They can develop, they can write code, they can write tests, they can build, but they cannot deploy to production, they cannot monitor production. And as a result of revelation that we are missing some people, we got DevOps. DevOps is all about creating self-sufficient teams that can do everything related to a single application or a group application, to be in full control from the beginning, from having an idea until it is running in production. Now, before we dive into DevOps, let's discuss shortly the stages of a life cycle of an application. It is relatively simple to divide those stages on a high level, and they are as follows. We need to plan what we want to do and create some design documents, or that can be markdown documents or drawings, I don't care what those are. And today, that phase is the shortest phase. We are abandoning the idea that we should design and document and what's not a year full of work or even a whole quarter. We work in small iterations. We need to have a big picture that is clear. We need to know where we might be going within a year, but the real plans, the real architecture and the real designs are based more on a per sprint basis, because we know that things are going to change drastically. Anyways, the first phase is planning or design. The first phase is design and planning. And the second phase is to write code, to develop an application. And by developing, I mean write code of your application, write code of tests, do whatever needs to be done so that you can say, hey, this feature is finished. What that means really depends from one team to another, but generally speaking, it means that I wrote all sorts of code and I pushed them to Git. And the third phase is to deliver. Once we are finished with the feature and it passed all our tests and what's not, we need to deliver it. And delivery means deploying to production. We might have different environments before we reach production. We might go through staging, integration, what's not. But ultimately, what really matters from the delivery perspective is that it is running in production. Everything else are just the phases or steps to get to production. I don't care about those. I mean, I do. But the ultimate goal is that whatever we did is running in production. That's the third phase, deliver. And finally, there is the fourth phase that is often misunderstood or forgotten by typical agile teams, and that's monitor what is going on. We need to make sure not only that it is deployed to production, but that it is running successfully, that there is no downtime, that the response times are high enough, that there are no latency issues, that the error rate is within acceptable range, and so on and so forth. There is a lot going on after we deploy, because it's not, hey, I deployed, my job is done. No. It's about, I deployed and it is successful. It runs and it continues running and it continues running all the way until I deploy a new feature on top of it, a new release. Now, during waterfall era, the whole process will take months or years. In Agile, we managed to reduce that process, but not as much as we would like. With typical Scrum teams and Agile teams in general, it is rarely happening that we deliver multiple times a day, because if we do not include operational knowledge, if we do not have sysadmin skills inside of those teams that are fully in charge of an application, delivering and operating application is usually left to somebody else, to those others, other teams, those sitting in a basement. So with Agile, we reduce delivery time, but not to multiple times a day, but maybe every couple of weeks, maybe once a month. And once a month or a few times a month is big, is huge compared to once a year that we had before. But that's not good enough because our competitors are much faster. And much faster today means multiple times a day, or at least once a day. If you cannot have it many times a day, once a day should be the minimum acceptable for any team to deliver value. And delivering value is not, I'm finished writing my code or I'm finished writing my tests. No, delivering value means it's in production. My users can see the value, whether that's a bug fix or a new feature or whatever it is. That is our overall goal. That is probably the easiest thing to measure. The question is, are we successful? And whether we are successful, it can be measured by how many times we deploy a day or how frequent are our deployments to production. If it's once a day for each project or for each application, then we are good. If it's more than once a day, if it's multiple, every few hours, then we are fantastic. I will not force you to go down that road. Maybe that's too much for you, but once a day, or whenever you have something reasonable, and you should have something reasonable after 8 hours of work, then you deliver it to production. If you're not, then you're not successful in 21st century. Coming up next on DevOps Explained. How does the world look like without DevOps independently? Whether most teams do not optimize their work for end users. Success is generally the number of features. People on the right side are measured by the stability of the system.